Welcome to Tea Time, my friends, a place where I muse about my gender transition experience and in the process aim to comfort and inspire others to a greater level of self-awareness. I am Artemis, and at the time of the posting of this video, it concludes a sabbatical of sorts that I have taken from the channel after having had an experience with ayahuasca this past July of 2022. I had a lot of processing to do following the weekend retreat, which I'll get into shortly, and I felt that I needed to take some time to build a rock-solid foundation from which to continue on with my journey and this channel. I anticipate looking back at this time as the beginning of an entirely new chapter for me, and as such, I've taken this opportunity to heart so that I can be of as much help to this community as I aim to be. The messages of well wishes and check-ins that I have gotten in this time away have given me more than enough motivation, and as this video is coming out Thanksgiving weekend, it's even more fitting to say that I am grateful for you all and all of your wonderful energy, and am showing my appreciation by sharing candidly with this video and many, many more lined up for the new year. So, let's dig into this mysterious experience that is ayahuasca, shall we? And I warmly invite you to settle in with your beverage of choice. I'm having spiced pear pie tea, as always, courtesy of the Rosenvine Gift Company. For anyone not yet acquainted, ayahuasca, also called vine of the soul or vine of the dead, is a psychedelic substance that originated in creation from indigenous people living in the Amazon rainforest. And let it be known, to this point, I had never experienced a psychedelic, and for myself, am only interested in targeted use of plant medicines to help guide personal growth. It used to be that if you wanted to experience this very unique psychotrip, you had to gain clearance from the local people to participate in their ceremonies after having traveled to locations that were very difficult to access. And now it has recently come to common popularity throughout other parts of the world, especially here in the United States, where pocket retreat locations have popped up providing the same medicinal concoction. As a quick but very crucial side note, this is my clear warning that if you plan to experience this for yourself, you absolutely must do your due diligence to ensure that you are getting it from a responsible source. This is not to be taken lightly, as I will be discussing. Now, the reason for the popularity of this combination of plants seems to be in line with this cultural shift that I've been noticing, which is a focus on accessing the deepest parts of yourself for healing, understanding, and self-improvement to have a positive effect on the inner and outer world, as opposed to other psychedelics that consistently simply cause colorful hallucinations or feelings of euphoria, making it pretty easy to understand why someone would wish to experience them. The general consensus of the experience of ayahuasca, however, is that it gives you the experience you most need in order to grow as a person. And for many, this experience can be terrifying as equally as it can be joyful. There are details that people will say they share in common with others' experiences, like meeting interdimensional beings, and theories abound on what this might be, but each individual person often has their own unique experience. The retreat I attended was phenomenal in their care of my physical, mental, and emotional state, as well as creating a set and setting that was as loving and positive as possible to lessen the terror of the things that can come out of your personal internal depths. Now, with this channel, I have aimed to take deep dives into questioning oneself through the frame of transgenderism, gender and biological sex, and provide as much empathy as possible for all sides of an issue relating to that in our current shared reality. I had been interested in ayahuasca for some time, entirely for its touted ability to unlock the mind and clear emotional blockages, and after much research, felt I was in need of greater clarity and some psychological cleansing in order to best serve my purpose. So, upon learning I had the opportunity at a facility close by, I prepared myself for the ritual. I had anticipated some difficult things to surface, and I thought I was prepared to handle it. For the content of this video, and the disclosure of lack of full context coverage, I am only going to cover my insights and experience while under the influence of the plant medicine itself in order to stay on channel topic as much as possible. It was a weekend retreat with 2 separate sessions of taking the prepared plant medicine in a heavily monitored setting. My first experience lasted almost 4 hours, and the second lasted almost 6, each taking me on a roller coaster that at points I was begging for mercy. Some of you expressed that you wanted to know if I had gained insights regarding the nature of my transgenderism, perhaps that I might have discovered who I really was in terms of gender and sex. For as cerebral a person as I am, I had already come to the personal conclusion that identifying with a label of gender or sex really doesn't matter to me. I am a collection of traits and really only needed to find labels in order to learn how other people might see me and therefore treat me and act accordingly. I just wasn't internally hung up on an identity as some people might think a transgender person may be, and that's understandable. I am what I am, and that's all what I am, as Popeye would say. My lessons were more about humility and control. The first dose of the plant medicine taught me to ask for help when I needed it, without getting in my own way. I had a huge issue with asking for help, which is a pretty common masculine trait, as it turns out. I had learned prior to the retreat that vomiting was an extremely common, if not inescapable, part of the ride, and all of the facility volunteers were trained to be encouraging and empathetic of the purge, as they called it. Ladies and gentlemen, I hate puking, and I especially hate puking in front of other people. I was so focused on trying not to vomit, despite the very understanding atmosphere, that for the first half of my trip, instead of puking, I shook so violently that my joints began to ache with pain. I had an inner dialogue going on, which went something like, "Hey, just raise your hand, ask for help, they're here to help you." And then what I assume was my ego replying, "What are they gonna do? They can't help you. You're on your own, bucko." Each time I chose silence, the literal buzzing in my body and the convulsing would get stronger, and I would hear the inner voice again, "All right, we can just keep turning this up until you get it." I was in so much distress at one point that I finally forced myself to stop convulsing long enough to raise my hand and just ask for help. A seasoned volunteer came over, asked me what he could do, and I replied, "I have no idea, I just need somebody here." He quietly sat by, and shortly after that, like a miserable cat with a hairball, I finally gave up holding it all in and, well, you don't need the detail. I instantly felt relief, came out of the fog, and realized at that moment the lesson was about letting other people help, regardless of what I think they can do, because I truly don't know everything, and the answer could be as simple as someone being there in your weakest moment without judgment. I felt like I had gotten a good grip on what these experiences were going to be like, so I went into my second night of plant medicine with a sense of confidence. A false sense of confidence. And that, my friends, is what the second lesson was about. My ego. Almost immediately after taking my second dose the next night, my heart started racing and I felt on the edge of a panic attack. And in my false sense of confidence, I thought, "Oh, I know what this is. I just need to ask for help and I'll be fine." I raised my hand, got a seasoned volunteer to come over, and by the time she asked me, "Hey, how you doing?" all I could muster was, "Mm-mm. Mm-mm." And she explained that the effects would come on strong and in waves, and just to breathe through it. Suddenly, though, the muscles around my mouth tightened, and I couldn't open my lips to say anything. It was as if the world's strongest magnet was keeping my mouth shut, and I was no longer able to speak. So much for asking for help now. This is when I felt that I literally disappeared. Meaning, my body and everything physical that I knew as myself no longer existed. I was a floating consciousness in a sea of nothing. And many people have described this experience on psychedelics, ayahuasca especially, and they often equate it to the death of the ego. And despite this being something that I had wished to experience going into the retreat, in that moment I was absolutely terrified, which was not an emotion that I had often allowed myself to feel or even thought that I really had, which was admittedly quite naive. Nothing of life that I had known was tangible or sensible in those moments. Now, upon reflection many months later, I've come to think of this discrepancy of experience, which is wanting the experience of total freedom and the terror of actually being there, as the disconnect we live with each day between our human dimensional avatar and its programming and the knowing of our eternal source energy, which some people might call the soul. You know, it's like that inner voice that says, please don't eat that eighth slice of pizza. And the other voice that says, but it's cheesy and bready, and you love cheesy and bready, yeah? Yeah? Your shoulder devil and angel, your Jiminy Cricket conscience versus Jung's beast within. It's a well-known human duality experience. And to relate this to the channel topic, I feel like it's easy for someone to mistake this duality with attributing the conflict to whether they fit more amongst men or women, because those differences are more tangible and visible in the outer world. Unlike what the Magic School Bus would have us believe, it's really dark inside a body, you know? I don't know how long I was out, but when I started coming back, I had a massive purge and briefly came back to being able to talk again and seemed quite with it, so to speak. I curled up on my little mat for some rest and thought that it was over. I stayed lucid for about 20 minutes and then began to feel like I was going to be sucked away into this other realm again. And I panicked. I got up, tried to get some fresh air outside, but you know the funny thing is, no matter where you are, so is the ayahuasca. Turns out you can't run from yourself, you know? Stubbornly, as if I still hadn't learned to give up control, I fought to stay lucid instead of just letting go. Well, I lost that final boss fight.
Yipe. On second thought.
Yay!
911! 911! Police! Civic authorities! ASPCA! ASAP!
I ended up crawling on my knees to a spot on the grass outside, trying to vomit to feel better, and just couldn't. You know when your dog eats grass to vomit? I'd be lying if I said the thought had never crossed my mind. I was that miserable. There's a secondary plant medicine practice called rapé, which helps to work in conjunction with the ayahuasca to facilitate purging. It's a miserable experience, in my opinion, but I asked for it just to help get me out. For me, initially after administration, it unleashed the most intensely rageful feelings I've ever had in memory, like cattle prodding a rodeo bull or a bloodthirsty, crazed Celtic berserker kind of insanity, before finally allowing me to purge. I spent a good long while after that whimpering into a bucket, absolutely exhausted, soaked in sweat, and unable to sleep until the next morning. It's funny now, you can laugh. The feelings of rage, though, were something that I had dealt with since adolescence, and I think are worth mentioning here, because eventually I'm going to do a video about how it seems culturally appropriate to manage or encourage aggression in young boys, but is shamed in young girls, which may lend to gender confusion down the road for atypical females who can identify more with accepted male aggression. In that last section of my experience, after doing some research on how therapists navigate emotional history, I believe that I was processing pent-up and repressed anger that was simply the primary emotional cover-up for so many other emotions that were never explored throughout most of my life. And for a little therapy 101, typically for people who are out of touch with their own emotions, the go-to emotion is anger, which is considered a primary emotion but is not the root emotion, in many situations. I had done a lot of work to process all of this cognitively when I considered gender transitioning to ensure I was making a well informed choice. But what I hadn't done that ayahuasca allowed me to do, on top of learning some very important lessons, was to give my physical body the chance to feel and purge all of this trapped trauma and emotion that I had denied myself. It's important to note that I do believe many people are turning to transitioning as a subconscious way to escape processing of trauma and emotions, thinking it's the answer, and end up detransitioning later. This is why it's so crucial to get mental therapy from a therapist who does not follow the affirmation no matter what model and investigates the claims of the patient thoroughly and respectfully, which is easier said than found, I realize. For days after this retreat, I would still have moments before bed or after waking up when I felt like I was slipping back into the nothing. And the immediate physiological response of my body was to go into a panic attack. As far as my body was concerned, it felt like it was dying, even though cognitively I knew I was fine. For me, this was good practice in evaluating objective reality versus my feelings, which were often generated by inherent biological programming to keep these meat suits alive. It's a useful function for sure, and just needs to be kept in check by logical processing for optimal functioning, in my opinion, which takes a lot of practice. If you want more on that topic, check out this video I did about the psychology of being offended. So the short of the long is that I realized that I needed to take some time away from the channel after that retreat to really refine these practices and dive deeper into myself with the aim to be an even more well-rounded and balanced person. I feel that the topics I cover come with the responsibility to do this in order to do it as balanced and informed as possible for the benefit of those listening, and I believe that if one does not know thoroughly what makes them tick, they are operating on subconscious programming, which is likely skewed and building a house of cards. While there are always things to learn and growing to do, I feel I am charged and ready for the forthcoming plans and videos I have for this channel, and as always, I look forward with spirited enthusiasm to your co-creative engagement in questions, comments, and emails. Cheers, friends, and much love and appreciation to you for being here. I'll see you at the next tea time.